Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. Before I introduce my guest today, I just wanted to make sure that you know about the free guide that is available on my website. It's the 5 best ways to support your loved one dealing with a concussion. If you have a friend or a family member who is struggling with post-concussion symptoms, or if you're the one struggling and would like your loved ones to know more about what you're going through and how they can help, head over to my website, theconcussioncoach.com, and download the free guide. My dad is a retired judge, and a few months ago, he sent me information that he had received about a continuing education seminar for lawyers on concussion litigation, at which my guest today was presenting. After reading about the topics that would be discussed, it occurred to me that the legal side of things is an aspect of the concussion experience that can be extremely challenging for many, many people, and which could be really helpful to bring onto the podcast. So I'm really grateful for my guest's quick response and unhesitating willingness to share his knowledge and experience with us today. My guest today is Michael Flomenhaft. He is the principal of the Flomenhaft Law Firm, PLLC, in New York, New York. His practice involves trying cases for victims of traumatic brain injury and severe chronic pain. He is renowned for his vast knowledge of neurosciences encompassing neuroimaging, neuropsychology, neurobiology, and the neuroanatomy of chronic pain related to these subjects. Mr. Flomenhaft is also distinguished for his knowledge in spinal neurology, the psychologically fragmenting consequences of trauma, and the evidentiary challenges of their courtroom presentation. Many of Mr. Flomenhaft's major awards have been for clients whose brain injury was either unrecognized or minimized. Mr. Flomenhaft serves on the Board of Advisors for the Center of Neuroscience and Law at Fordham Law School and was a director of Neurolaw for the Program for Imaging and Cognitive Sciences at Columbia University. He is a graduate of Boston University School of Law and the Trial Lawyers College. Wow, that was a lot of really big words. You are really smart. I'm so excited to have you here sharing all of your experience and knowledge with us. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Thanks for the invitation.
Can we start out with having you share a little bit more about yourself? What made you interested in doing law, and then kind of how you ended up focusing in on the brain injury law?
So my initial interest in doing law was watching TV law programs and Perry Mason when I was a little boy, and I thought that would be exciting to be an advocate. The opportunity on the civil side for trying cases is really in personal injury. So when I found an opportunity to work after law school in personal injury, as like most starting personal injury attorneys, I was doing mostly motor vehicle cases because most personal injury cases involve motor vehicle accidents. And pertinent to our discussion today, most concussions arise from motor vehicle accidents. Mm. And so just to progress a little further, I had no background actually in any of the sciences. I had no background in biology or anatomy or anything. And I never thought of myself as having an interest or an aptitude in that area. But when I started doing this work, I was handling these motor vehicle cases, and I had at that time when I was starting, and this is before soldiers were coming back from Iraq with blast trauma. This is before there was the recognition of referring you for a CAT scan or an MRI, for concussion. They're really investigating gray matter consequences. But really, the vast majority of concussions that have any persistence to them in the symptomatology are white matter phenomena.
Yes, thank you for defining that. I think that's important for people to know.
And for that reason, most concussions, even with persistent symptomatology, at least 80% of them, 80% of them will have negative MRIs, and almost all of them will have negative CAT scans, and many of them will have normal neurological evaluations. And based on that, lots of physicians will get furnish an assurance to their patients that Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, you're going to be okay. Or your son can go back to play football; he's okay. But they're really evaluating part of the brain, which is really not the main part of the brain, which is affected by concussion. And I'll get to that why in a second. But so that's really important because for all sorts of reasons. So first of all, many attorneys don't know that. And based on those initial evaluations, they can significantly discount a case despite the complaints of their clients that they're having really persistent problems or evolving problems in terms of various types of cognition or emotion or personality changes or balance or visual changes or their family members say they're not the same. This is not the person I knew. Yeah. But they say they don't have the doctors say it's fine. But the doctors aren't really evaluating the part of the brain which in most concussions, is the culprit for these problems. It's also important because concussion in most cases involving white matter injury, it's not associated with a loss of consciousness. It could be associated with being initially confused or dazed or somewhat disoriented, but not necessarily loss of consciousness. And by the time the person gets to the emergency room, their Glasgow Coma Scale could be perfect, 15 out of 15. And neurologically, they can pass every test. And so the emergency room record will show that person up as fine. And as I said before, the imaging will depict that person as fine. But white matter injury has a different trajectory than gray matter. I mean, gray matter injuries, if you're having, subdural hematoma or bleeding in the brain, the CAT scan will pick that up, most of the time right away. But white matter injury evolves over days and weeks and sometimes months. And so unless you're aware of that issue and the importance of evaluating the client or the patient for that issue, that clinical evaluation is going to be bypassed. And from a legal standpoint, the client situation will be minimized. I mean, it's really important to understand that the brain is basically 2.5 pounds of jello, and with a trillion microscopic, very fragile connections. And if you're hit in the rear by a truck or even a car, from my standpoint, it doesn't take much to disrupt those connections, and I'll explain why in a second. But the attorneys, and even the physicians guiding suspicion has to be in the absence of proof otherwise, especially if there are complaints that there has been some sort of brain injury. And to me, a concussion is a brain injury. There's a brain injury until shown otherwise, rather than there's no brain injury until shown there is. And I think that's the understanding that a lot of doctors and attorneys have. There's no brain injury until they're shown there is. For me, given certain traumatic consequences, there's a brain injury until you show me there's not.
That's such an interesting and important and good point.
That's especially the case if you're dealing if the patient or client is a woman, or especially the case if the person's older. And the reason why gender makes such a difference, especially in motor vehicle accidents, is that a lot of the white matter damage occurs from the backward and forward motion that occurs, or forward and backward motion occurs from the collision. And because women's neck musculature is much more delicate, they can't stabilize the head from that movement in the same way the man's can. So a woman, to me, is much more prone to brain injury from that type of event than a man. And of course, there is epidemiology that says that most people recover from concussion, but that epidemiology is skewed by the fact that most people that have concussions are younger, so their ability to recover is much better. But if you take older age cohorts, people in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the resilience of the brain is much less. And so the ability to recover is very diminished. I probably said too much already, but maybe I want to have some questions in the meantime.
No, that was fantastic. You opened up a lot of that. Yes, there are a lot of questions that I have based on what you said, but I think all of that was so important for people to hear and good to know. And for the people who are maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s who have had a concussion, I just do want you to know that there is still hope. There is still recovery that is possible, but it's going to look different and not be the same as the high school kiddo who had a concussion doing sports.
So, there is a relationship. I mean, after an accident, the issue between white matter and gray matter is not totally discrete, but it's different in concussion and let's say a more initially serious brain trauma. And that is that over time, if there's white matter injury, there's a significant probability that the gray matter there'll be areas of the brain where the gray matter will atrophy. And so, although the gray matter may be not injured at the outset, it'll atrophy over time, and that can start 2-3 months out, and continue for many months afterwards for a year, and so that explains number one, the decline that contributes to the decline over time for many people that have concussion, but this we can talk about later. It also explains the fact that concussion is not a static event. And although when people are seeing their doctors, they stop seeing their doctors when there's a plateau of their symptoms, or they stop seeing their lawyers evaluate them when there's a plateau of their symptoms. But that progressive atrophy can have consequences decades down the road, which very few people are ever advised of, and very few attorneys take account of in terms of claiming for, in terms of pain and suffering, in terms of family life, in terms of future costs. That's a whole subject in its own right.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And again, there's so many points that you brought up. I'm just curious, can you share with us why it is that the white matter takes longer to show up symptomatically with the white matter injuries?
Well, what happens with white matter is that the white matter, I mean, gray matter injury, actually part of the brain is impacted, and you're getting subdural hematomas and things like that. The white matter injury usually occurs from a stretching of the white matter. And for instance, because the gray matter and the white matter have different consistencies, let's say in a rear-end collision, for instance, or a front-end collision, which is called an acceleration-deceleration event, the gray matter and the white matter will move at different speeds. And the white matter will get stretched. And that stretching will cause changes within the white matter, where the internal structures and chemistry of the white matter becomes perturbed. But that degradation doesn't occur immediately with the stretching. The stretching precipitates that degradation. So it's a very different trajectory. But most attorneys and physicians go by what they see in the emergency room report. And of course, in the emergency room, the priority is a person's pain. And usually that's neck or back pain. It's not their neurological symptoms, especially if they test fine neurologically, in the emergency room. And so, anyway, that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I will say one more thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
That is that when there are white matter injuries, I mean, for many doctors and attorneys, a negative MRI, for instance, contemporaneous with with traumatic event, is an assurance that the patient is fine. But for me, it's not that at all. To me, that's an assurance that the person was fine at the time of the event. But unless there's another MRI, 6 months to a year later, that shows me there's been no atrophy. To me, that normal MRI contemporaneous to the event is not an assurance of knowing of brain trauma. It's proof that there was brain trauma.
Okay. Yes. And a lot of people, I'm guessing, don't necessarily have not everybody gets an MRI after their first one. And so if they like down the road were wanting to get an MRI, if they don't have a previous one to compare it to, would you be able to see that atrophy, or would you not be able to tell because there's not something to compare it to?
That's a really good question. So it's very rare that someone will get an MRI in the emergency room. I mean, the imaging of choice in the emergency room is a CAT scan because it's a better visualization of bleeding that would require neurosurgical intervention, and that's the main concern in an emergency room.
Yeah.
If the patient, even if the patient gets an MRI down the road, a year down the road, that's a much better vantage point to see atrophy. And of course, not of course, but the type of, I mean, there are different types of atrophy. Most people, as you get older, many people as you get older will experience some sort of atrophy. The brain shrinks at a certain point, particularly in your 60s. The hallmark of traumatic brain injury is asymmetric atrophy, and there are certain areas of the brain that are signature areas for atrophy, because those certain areas of the brain are especially susceptible to trauma. Just for example, the frontal lobe, particularly what they call the orbital frontal lobe, most prominently the corpus callosum, which separates the right and left hemispheres. Areas of other brain that are junctional between the gray and white matter, those areas are particularly vulnerable to brain injury. And so you often see post-traumatic atrophy in those areas. However, lots of post-traumatic atrophy can really elude visualization. It's you can have significant atrophy, but not be visualized by even a highly qualified neuroradiologist. And so now they have what they call volumetric imaging, volumetric studies, which use computers to measure that to really measure that atrophy regionally, and determine what actually is what regions have been degraded in terms of their brain, in terms of their volume, atrophically. And so that's really important information in terms of pinpointing the source of that atrophy as being physiological or being traumatic.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And why are we still like, can you help me understand why not everybody knows what you know? What is it that's preventing doctors, even doctors, right? Doctors and lawyers, is this just information that's new and we're working on getting it out there? Or I know there's always going to be some, inertia in making changes, especially in big systems like the healthcare system, the legal system. But what do you see as the reasons that this isn't more widely known?
I think there's probably a number of reasons. I think to really understand the limitations of neurology, you have to understand neuroscience, and the understanding of white matter and its consequences has traditionally been in the realm of neuroscience. And you would think that neurologists, as part of neuroscience, part of neurology, neuroscience would be part of it, but typically it's not. Very few neurologists I know deal with no neuroscience. It's not part of their training. Neurologists are trained to diagnose and treat. Neuroscientists are trained to understand why, and you can, if a person meets certain diagnostic criteria, and the doctor follows a certain protocol, the neurologist follows a certain protocol, or the physician follows a certain protocol, they've discharged their responsibilities medically. It doesn't require them to understand in a much deeper level the imaging neuroscience or the neurophysiology of brain injury in order for them to adhere to those algorithms of diagnosis and treatment. However, I'd say that I mean, there are attorneys around the country that are devoting themselves to TBI, they're acquainted with these issues, they're becoming acquainted with these issues, but it really comes to really caring to understand, what's going on with your patient, what's going on with your client.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how much effort you want to put to your own and invest in terms of your own education. I mean, I've read 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 articles that are inside my head as I'm talking to you, because I really just cared about understanding this issue, which I understand I couldn't get in terms of traumatic brain injury, in terms of pain I just couldn't get from physicians. And so oftentimes I have to educate the physicians I deal with, even though they're really fine physicians.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing is, and when I bring other professionals on, we talk about this a lot, just that how it is such a specialized field. Like you have to know concussion specifically, brain injury specifically, in order to provide the kind of help that actually helps people to recover. And I imagine it's a similar thing with on the legal side of things. Like if you don't understand it all, you're not going to be able to provide the right kind of help.
Well, one more thing occurs to me in that respect, and that is that, concussion or what's called mild traumatic brain injury is, I'll say two things about that. It very rarely affects a person's intelligence, and it very rarely affects how a person speaks. And that's how we judge people. And so when a doctor meets somebody, meets a patient, or a lawyer meets a patient, and they're obviously very intelligent and they're very articulate, it's very to think of them as brain injured, or to even but there's that expression. There's a difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. The concussion victim with persistent problems hasn't lost their intelligence. It hasn't lost their ability to talk, but their functionality has really been degraded, and that's not judged in personal conversations. So I think that a lot of physicians will judge people how they appear. A lot of lawyers will judge people how they appear, and also a lot of lawyers will feel nervous that listen, if the patient appears too intact, how are jurors are not going to respect that injury or recognize that injury, and that could be dissuading to attorneys. So the other thing is that I should say that concussion is also classified, as as mild traumatic brain injury. That misnomer is, I think, going to be changed soon. When they say mild traumatic brain injury, that doesn't mean that the injury is mild. That's a triage category. That means that the circumstances requiring hospitalization are not present. But the incongruity is that mild traumatic brain injury, which does not require any loss of consciousness at all, can have much greater long-term consequences than severe traumatic brain injury, which involves extensive loss of consciousness. But those consequences as a result of white matter injury will be from progressive gray matter atrophy. They'll exhibit itself often decades down the road.
Thank you so much for clarifying that and pointing that out. I do think that is so important. And I appreciate you also mentioning the fact that essentially this is an invisible injury. Like people, you can talk to somebody who's had a mild TBI and a concussion, and they can, and dealing with persistent symptoms, they can sound fine. They can have an intelligent conversation with you. They look fine, and they might not be feeling it. And even, you said it doesn't always impact intelligence or ability to speak, but for the person, it might be, even though they may appear normal, it might be less than what they're used to, and they feel it, right? Like they might feel, oh, I can't come up with the words that I want to say. Oh, I just can't think the way that I used to, or I have this brain fog. But that doesn't necessarily come across to the person they're talking to. But their brain is dealing with the consequences of that, and they're gonna, pay for that conversation for days later as they're trying to recover from the overstimulation that happened because of that conversation. So I just really appreciate that, emphasizing that this is an invisible injury, and people don't. It makes sense that people wouldn't necessarily, even professionals wouldn't necessarily understand how much this is impacting somebody unless they sit down and listen. And a lot of times that person might not even be able to articulate what it is that they're feeling because it's so overwhelming to have those conversations. Plus,
so let me say something about that.
Yeah.
So what you said gave me something occurred to me as I was listening to you, and that is that you're right. It's invisible. It's often invisible to the outside, but that loss is present on the inside, and that loss is associated with a grief that doesn't resolve often because it's a part of you that no longer exists, and it's yours, and you want to get it back, but you can't get it back. So there's that grief that you carry, that the person carries with them about a part of themselves that's theirs, but it's no longer theirs, and also shame, a shame that they have that because it's invisible, they have to hide they want to hide who they hide from the world, that they're not who they were,
Mm.
and also um, a tremendous fear about what's going to happen to them. Are people going to want to be with them anymore? Because it often produces an increasing social isolation. Or what are they going to be in the future? So I think the grief, the fear, the shame are tremendous emotional burdens that people with persistent concussions carry that don't get recognized, in addition to the social isolation. Because a lot of among spouses, the person you love, the person you married, and the person you fell in love with may no longer exist in the same way. And what do you do when the person you fell in love with is no longer that person anymore? And there's the guilt about the change of feelings and the wanting to even remove yourself from a person who needs you, but whose changes are tremendously burdensome to you, and even sometimes to your health. So that's not exactly technical or scientific, but but that's what was going through my mind as I was listening to you.
No, I sincerely appreciate you sharing those things. That is exactly that fear, the shame, the grief, the relationship issues, the guilt that comes along with like all of that. I so appreciate that you recognize that you've seen that and I hope that will be very validating to people. I'm sure it will be who are listening to this because, even though we have the scientific perspective, we understand things in a certain way, but the way that it impacts a person's life and experience really matters. And those pieces are very rarely addressed. I think even if somebody does get help for their concussion or whatever, they get the legal or the financial assistance that they need, those aspects of how it impacts their life are not always defined and said out loud and addressed. And I do think that they're so, so important. And that's why I feel so passionate about what I do as a coach, is like addressing those underlying things that are not often talked about. So I just so appreciate that you feel that you know it, that you've seen it and put it into words so well. Thank you for that.
Actually, two more things that occurred to me as I was listening to you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a legal aspect that's important, that routinely, I mean, for all married concussion victims, there's a loss of services case. It's the husband and the wife, the spouse can always sue for the changes in the relationship as a result of the other spouse's injury. That could be the loss of support, emotional support, the loss of contributions around the home, the alienation of the sexual alienation, all sorts of things. And usually the uninjured spouse's loss is not really explored or taken seriously in pursuing these cases, but it's really the uninjured spouse who's really carrying the narrative of their loved one's loss. It's because the person that's hurt can't describe what's happened to them, but the people in their life, whether it be their wife or their husband or their children or their friends, their experience of them is really, and their description of the experience of them is an enactment of that loss. And so those people are really important witnesses, in a case that's going to proceed. You can't try these cases based on medical evidence alone. I mean, medical evidence is important as a scaffold to your proof, but cases are very much built in terms of how people perceive emotionally a loss, and that's based on the narrative that the lawyer has been able to construct, and that narrative is based on the people in their life, in the client's life.
Wow, I did not know that. That is very, very interesting, and good to know. What I would actually love to hear, as you've been working in this very specialized area, what have you noticed to be consistently challenging for people who have brain injuries? Like, what obstacles do they face in the legal world? And what do you think they would, in addition to this, because I think this is one of these things, but what do you think they would benefit from being made aware of? as they try to navigate the tricky waters that are the legal system.
I mean, there's so many obstacles. If it's a motor vehicle accident, the potential for injury will be minimized by the amount of vehicular damage. But of course, American cars are built, unlike European cars, are built to minimize vehicular damage. So there can be very little impact to the car, but those forces get transmitted to the brain. But people don't know that, and they think if there's very little vehicular damage, that means there's very little force that was transmitted. So lots of times it could be, it's like if you drop a box of eggs, the box is fine, but the eggs all crack. So I mean, the American cars are built not to crack.
Yeah.
European cars have much bigger what they call crumple zones. Second, I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's a whole discussion. But the emergency personnel that come to the scene will record the person whether the person lost consciousness. Or the emergency room, they'll record whether the person lost consciousness, and they'll ask the person, "Did you lose consciousness?" And most of the time, they'll say, "I don't know," or they'll say no. But very few people have lost consciousness know they've lost consciousness.
Right.
Yeah. You require a witness to know they've lost consciousness. The only way you can know if you lost consciousness is by someone asking the question, the emergency room personnel or ambulance personnel or emergency room personnel or the neurologist, and I really see this. What's the last thing you remember, and what's the next thing you remember? Because it's identifying that gap in memory, which establishes the loss of consciousness. And that loss of consciousness is not, that gap is what's called anterograde amnesia. And we know the term amnesia. Amnesia is you forget something. It's not that you've forgotten something. It's that the brain is basically gone offline by the trauma. So it just wasn't registering anything during that period of time. And anterograde amnesia is one of the most classic signs of brain injury following a trauma, but it's very rare. I've rarely ever seen it in an emergency room, maybe never, or ambulance corps, where they try to establish whether it was anterograde amnesia. And most neurologists never ask that either. So in terms of your question, what are some of the obstacles? They say, well, there's no loss of consciousness. But there was the real questions that needed to be asked were never asked. They may not be asked years down the road. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's fascinating. And with the anterograde amnesia, that's not even that's not necessarily a loss of consciousness. It's just the being dazed and not sure what's happening, that you would have that gap in remembering.
Right. I mean, you could be awake. I mean, you could be awake.
Okay.
And still go offline.
Yes. Okay. And that I do, I think that's so fascinating. I haven't heard that before. It makes sense to me. It makes so much sense. And yes, you're right. That should be what people are asking. But it's not being asked. But even if they didn't lose consciousness, we know that doesn't mean that they didn't have a concussion. So
loss of consciousness is not a criteria for concussion.
Yep.
When I was starting out, for many years, I saw doctors writing their records, concussion but no traumatic brain injury, and that was the governing understanding for neurologists for decades. This was something distinct from traumatic brain injury, but a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. It's a mild traumatic brain injury. So yeah, I had to overcome that bias, and it became a real obstacle when I tried to represent people whose own doctors said concussion but no traumatic brain injury. It's very hard to prevail in a case where the treating doctor discounts their own patient's injury.
Yes. How do you do that?
It's very hard. It's very hard because people credit the treating doctor, but a lot of treating doctors don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's really true in the area of concussion and traumatic brain injury. And that can really infect a case and create another obstacle in the case. Another challenge is that people go back to work, but and that's used against them in some ways, that they went back to work. Well, if they went back to work, how bad could they be?
Yes.
Well, usually when they're going back to work, they're being they're being supported by their colleagues, being covered by their colleagues. And so it's very important in those cases for those colleagues that are covering for them or helping them or bolstering them to be witnesses in the case, to talk about how they needed to be helped. Then, of course, there's the issue of prior accidents. If they've had prior accidents, then the effort will be to attribute the current symptomatology to the prior accidents. But so it's very important to really establish a person's functionality prior to this accident to show that the prior accident didn't disturb the functionality. However, every prior accident you had increases the potential for more consequential symptoms from the next accident. And so
Yes.
because you've used up part of your reserve. And so I mean, there's so many issues that come up. Though defense will hire neuropsychologists and accuse and do tests that really from which they determine the patient is malingering or faking. And I mean, that's a whole subject, a whole different lecture how to deal with that. But for a long time, the more advanced imaging that's now used to try and profile white matter damage and post-traumatic atrophy was challenged in terms of admissibility. And with those admissibility challenges are still going on. I have it in my next trial actually coming up in New Jersey. But those challenges are increasingly failing. But that was going on for decades.
Okay. Can you talk about the imaging thing? Because that, I assume that's, if we have access to good imaging that can be used as objective data to prove, then the malingering thing, like I appreciate you bringing that up. I imagine that's, oh man, it's hard enough. I know I've talked to so many people who are like, I question myself and like all this like medical gaslighting, like, oh no, it's not as bad as you say it is. Or like, and people are like, well, is it as bad as I say it is? Am I just crazy now? Like there's so much questioning of themselves that they have. And then other people not understanding and saying, oh no, it can't be that. It can't be related to the concussion. Like all of that whole piece is another layer of challenge that people are dealing with as they're going through all of this. So yeah, I would love to hear about the imaging and anything else that you want to tell us about how to deal with the challenge of having people say that you're malingering and faking it.
Okay, let me start with the imaging.
Okay.
So, as I said before, negative. I mean, like an MRI is far more sensitive than a CAT scan. But 80% of MRIs will be at least 80% of MRIs will be negative in concussion. So a negative MRI means nothing in terms of the presence or absence of brain damage, since the MRI is so insensitive to white matter.
Mm-hmm.
MRIs are basically gray matter visualizations, although it picks up some sort of gross white matter lesions, but not the type we're talking about in this particular injury. The type we're talking about, this type of injury, but actually there is a sequence of MRI called SWI, susceptibility weighted imaging, and that needs to be requested. And that's very sensitive to microscopic bleeds, that regular MRI will detect, or actually deposits what they call a residue of bleeds. And so that can be very, very important. That can make a huge difference in a case if you have that SWI sequence.
Can I ask real quick, with that, does it have to be done? Is there a window that needs to be, it has to be done in?
The residue of bleeding is called hemosiderin, and it lasts forever.
Oh, okay. Okay, good to know.
So it doesn't have to be contemporaneous with the event.
Okay, that's good to know.
Another really important imaging is called diffusion tensor imaging, and often known as DTI. And DTI is specifically designed to evaluate the integrity of the white matter, and depending upon the pattern of disruption, that could also be consistent with the presence of traumatic brain injury, and support the diagnosis that the concussion has inflicted brain injury.
Is this relatively new imaging? Is it like well established, well known? or?
Actually, I introduced this into American jurisprudence, into the American court system in 2004, dating myself. There's been, but since then, there have been many decisions around the country approving its admissibility. For any doctor that's really experienced in traumatic brain injury, he or she should be very well familiar with DTI. And I think that if you're concerned about investigating whether you have brain injury, your evaluation is incomplete without DTI.
Okay. And how can people, they just ask their doctor to prescribe it for them? Like how does one go about getting that?
Well, you have to ask their physician to prescribe it, and have to refer to a neurological facility that does DTI. I mean, there are now DTI softwares that have been cleared by the FDA.
Awesome.
And so they're increasingly around the country are radiology facilities are offering that DTI as an adjunct to MRI.
Excellent. And is this also something that you can months, years later have the DTI done and find out, like it will still show if there was damage to the white matter?
Yeah, because actually, since the white matter takes time, it's better not to do it right after the accident.
Oh, okay,
It's
right.
better to do it, at least several months afterwards. Otherwise, you're not going to get an accurate profile. So yeah,
Okay.
we can do it years later.
Okay, that's good to know. And I imagine that legal cases can take years, but if somebody is, you would know much better than I do. I'm curious when somebody has a car accident and this process, how long does it typically take? And like, would this kind of imaging, if you're a year into the legal case here, you can still bring that in and it's still going to be effective, or because you can't do it right away? Can you just speak to that?
Well, most legal cases take several years.
Okay.
I can't speak to. I mean, every case has its own lifespan.
Yeah.
And every jurisdiction has its own timetables. So I can't speak to. But it's hard for me to believe that most patients, most clients can't get a DTI if it's going to inform their claim.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Thank you. Excellent. Anything else that we should know about imaging?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to know, but I'll just.
Yeah, there's a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. So we talked about brain atrophy. And so brain atrophy is increasingly evaluated by computerized programs. One of the FDA cleared programs is NeuroQuant. And NeuroQuant evaluates brain atrophy. And
I've heard of that before.
And so if you brain atrophy is important to know about, not just in terms of proving there's been brain damage, but brain atrophy also ominously indicates that the future is clouded, because brain atrophy means you've lost part of your brain, and part of your brain has died, and the less brain you have, the less intact longevity you have. So what I said before, the consequences of concussion can be decades down the road, and it's important. I think it's important for a lawyer to be aware that he's not just evaluating now and representing now. He's really representing four people. He's really representing who that person was, who that person is, who that person was going to be if this never happened, and we'll say now who that person is going to be, quite sadly, because this has happened.
That feels heavy. That's a lot. Like how?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's important for people to know that, though, and I imagine especially for the lawyers to see that and recognize that. It's yeah. What would you say to lawyers who you do say these things to lawyers, but what would you tell them as they're considering all of that? Like how do you take all of that into account?
Well, I think that every person, is every person is living a drama, and often that's a family drama. And so it's, you can't look at the your clients in terms of just medical tests.
Mm.
I mean, I'm very advanced and sophisticated about the science and the medicine, but we're really talking about, ultimately, what really matters is not the science and the medicine, but the life
Mhm.
and the person's life and who they were. And that requires really a dedication and immersion in that person's life story and their goals, their aspirations for themselves, for their loved ones. And there's no shortcut to really grasping that story. But if there's enough, if the injuries, if the accident is definite enough and the insurance is sufficient enough and the injuries are provable enough, that immersion is really important.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have cases where the damages are tremendous, but the insurance is minimal. So this type of effort is really for the most part requires insurance, $1 million or more, or $2 million or more to make it really worth a really comprehensive effort I'm talking about.
And when you're saying that, like the insurance that people should be having as they're driving their own cars around, or what? Who has?
I'm talking about if, people that are hit by, by trucks, people involved in, a lot of cases I'm remiss are construction accidents. And there are a lot, and construction cases usually have very substantial insurance.
Mhm.
And most concussion cases involve coinciding neck and back injuries. And those cases usually get settled because there are there are spinal surgeries, neck fusions, and back fusions. But the brain injury never gets really addressed because often these people are being evaluated by workers' compensation doctors, and the workers' compensation doctors are really evaluating them just neurologically, which bypasses the brain consequences. But
Mhm.
there's a vast population of construction cases with very serious injuries, where these brain injuries and these future decade consequences are just totally bypassed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or people that
I
have
see that.
slips and falls or trips and falls involving in buildings that have significant insurance. Those are
Okay.
also, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's good to know. And do you have, well, I guess what, and I, we're planning, if you're still game for it, I would still love to bring you back on and continue this conversation.
Sure.
Thank you. I feel like there's so much that that would be so helpful for so many people to hear. So I appreciate that willingness. So just as we're wrapping up here, what resources would you point other lawyers to if they wanted to increase their understanding about this topic and how they can best serve their clients?
Well, I think there are traumatic brain injury, continuing legal education courses that are being given throughout the country by various bar associations, by the American Academy of Justice. So, they're available to really, those resources are available for attorneys that really want to upgrade themselves in this way.
Okay, perfect. And if somebody that is listening to this podcast has a concussion and they need to find legal representation, what would you recommend that they look into as they're trying to hire a lawyer who will represent them? Are there suggestions that you'd have as things that they should be aware of or looking out for in their talking to lawyers?
Well, if they're in New York, they're in New York, New Jersey, they can email me,
Perfect.
and that's Flomenhaft. That's MFLOMENHAFT at brainjusticeny.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes so people can find out as well.
Well, call my office at 646-747-0300. Or if they have cases around the country, I can help direct them to counsel, the states that have this concentration.
Mhm.
Be glad to do that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very
Sure.
much. Yeah, because again, there are so many parts of dealing with a concussion that are just will make you feel like you're drowning, right? Like there's so many pieces to it and so many things that you don't think about and how they would be so challenging. And the legal piece is one significant part of that. So yeah, any direction or help I'm sure would be so appreciated. So thank you for that. Um,
No,
And
there's a lot more to say that we haven't gotten to.
yeah, we'll bring you back. I'm looking forward to our next conversation already. So let's go ahead. Yeah, let's just leave with one little and we can talk about this more as well.
Sure.
But if any hope that you can offer to people listening, what's the ray of hope that we can give them?
Well, I think the most effective intervention I've seen for traumatic brain injury has been neurofeedback.
Okay.
And I know that they've used neurofeedback a lot. The United States military has used neurofeedback a lot for concussion, for soldiers with concussions. And to me, neurofeedback is, if it's available, is the most direct way of reestablishing white matter connectivity or and recovering function. So I mean, there's a lot more to say, but to me, the starting point is finding a neurofeedback facility, and you have to Google that to see where that's available in your. It's available, where you live. It's not. It's neurofeedback is not traditionally given by. There are some neurologists that give it. It's usually offered by neuropsychologists or psychologists or other subspecialists. But to me, neurofeedback, I'm being quick about it because there's a lot more I can say about it. But to me, neurofeedback is like going to a gym for your brain and really challenging the parts of your brain that are electrically underperforming, and really challenging them to really recover that performance. So just like if you had a physical injury, you go to physical therapy and work with a trainer. A neurofeedback offers a similar potential. So I've seen tremendous recoveries from neurofeedback.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I so appreciate it. And we'll put your phone number and email on the show notes so people can find it. And I'm looking forward to the next time. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.